Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ. One of the striking details of the gospel that I find really inspiring is that, well, Peter and James and John are up on this high mountain and they're like, hey, let's build some tents. I'd like to stay here forever. This is pretty extraordinary. Wouldn't you want to do that? And then it says that the cloud came and overshadowed them. Overshadowed them. Just as Peter was saying, let's build these tents. And then the Father spoke. And what I find really inspiring is that later on, when Peter is in the Acts of the Apostles going about ministry, his shadow overshadows people who are healed. So there's this overshadowing on transfiguration of Peter, and then there's this overshadowing of Peter later on, and people find healing. What an extraordinary event, the transfiguration of Christ, to see His glory. The illumination of Christ was really also as illumination of the disciples, the apostles, because they're understanding more of who He is. The cloud, the Father says, this is my beloved Son. This is the most prized. This is the most chosen, the most loved, the most wise. Follow Him, listen to Him. And yet the disciples are also learning you don't have this glory and this great, wondrous illumination without the cross. This is like a moment to help you get through what is a stumbling block for many that is to come. Father Kelly was sharing with me the story of the man in Colorado who fell and got his arm stuck in the rocks. Do you remember that story? I think his name's Aaron. This was some years back. And there he was stuck in there, out there hiking, and no one was around to help him, to get him loose. And he was going to die. He knew it. And so he had to cut his arm off. Okay? But one thing he shared later was, in that moment where he was stuck, he kind of had this vision of a child, that he would one day have a son. And that gave him hope to do what was extraordinarily difficult, which was a very serious cross. And so, freeing himself by loosening his arm, he went to safety. 7 years later, he had a son, and he told the story about that vision. In a way, it's an analogy or a real-life story of Jesus' Mount Transfiguration. Now he's going to go to be crucified. He's going to give his life, but this is what's to come ultimately. This is the victory of heaven, okay? And in our own lives, too, sometimes we have to face difficult choices, walk a path that's unexpected. Maybe God's asking us to, face a difficulty. But He promises in the end a kind of victorious, which is so beautiful and so glorious, and that we ourselves will be transfigured. I like to just maybe a last thought about purity, because the transfiguration is also about purity and how much we want to be transparent vessels of the light. Moses and Elijah appeared with Jesus. Do you remember what Moses' face was like? It was so brilliant, he actually had to cover it with a veil. It was so brilliant. Elijah went up in a fiery chariot at the end of his life. Those two were the two who fasted for 40 days in the Old Testament. Jesus, 40 days in the desert, fasting. Moses and Elijah were the ones who fasted for 40 days in the Old Testament. And here they are with him. They knew something of that desert experience, but they also knew something of the glory of God on top of Mount Sinai where Moses was, on top of the same mountain where Elijah was. So do you want to see that glory? Do you want to see Jesus transfigured? Would you love to have a vision like that? That's actually your destiny, but we have to go through the cross to get there.